I'm going to show you a couple quick things about what's called non-destructive editing. Okay. And this non-destructive editing includes things like adjustment layers and smart objects. Is anybody here, raise your hand if you're familiar with adjustment layers and smart objects. Adjustment layers, raise your hand. Okay, raise your hand, smart objects. Oh, let me introduce you to a new friend. This is going to be great. Okay, smart objects. This is what one of the things we're going to talk about here. Okay, for those of you who are, I've seen some nice camera equipment around here, and I've peeked at some of the photos here, and these photos look great. So I'm sure you all got nice equipment. Okay, if you don't already have it, you should have a point and shoot with you at all times, because this shot right here was on the way to work one day. I stopped at a light. I looked over my shoulder and saw this, reached in my bag, pulled out my point and shoot, took the picture, light turned green, and I was off. This happened in like 5 seconds. And it's a pretty interesting composition. You kind of wonder what the story is, how this bear ended up here on the side of the street. Okay, so always have like point and shoot with you, of course, because you're gonna find those kinds of compositions. So the first thing that I want to talk about is if you're working, let's say, raise your hand if you're using Lightroom. Raise your hand if you're, okay, got one at least. Okay, anybody use Camera Raw? Okay, so let's just say that you've gone into Camera Raw, you've done your editing that you want to be doing, and then you've decided that you need to come into Photoshop and do some sort of edits, let's say with a filter. Okay, normally if you run a filter, you have to do it right on your image, which means you're going to do that right on your layer or your actual image. So there's some ways to work around it. You could do a save as and have a copy of it. You could duplicate a layer. You could do a lot of things. So what can happen is, let's say I'm going to go here to my filter and I'm going to do a Gaussian blur. Okay? If I save this file and walk away from it, I've destroyed those pixels, and what I have to do is start over from scratch. So I have a lot of steps that I'd have to fix if I ran that filter. Okay? So one thing you can do, instead of running that filter right on top of your original image here, is to right-click on your layer, and you've got an option here for Smart Objects. This is going to be true for anything newer than starting with CS3 and CS4. You've got Smart Objects. Okay, so I'm going to change that to Convert to Smart Object, and this is the key to knowing if this is a Smart Object or not. This icon right here indicates that it's a smart object once you've changed it. Okay. Now the difference is when I go ahead and run a filter now, it becomes editable. So if you change your mind, you can go right back to it and fix it later. So I'm going to go to the filter drop-down menu here. I'm going to go to one of my favorite ones here is Distort, and it's actually lens correction. This is one of the ones I like to use. The reason I like that is because with your point and shoots, you don't get a whole lot of interesting information in your photo. Sometimes you got to add it. So what I like to do is add a vignette. So I'm here in the middle of this filter, and I'm going to drag this over to the left, and notice how it's going to just add kind of a lens blur around the edge of that. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, call it good, and you'll notice that my layer changed. Okay, so where it says Smart Filters and Lens Correction, and it's got a little eyeball next to it, so those of you who have used layers before, that means I can turn off that layer if I change my mind. If I change my mind and I say, you know what, I don't like that lens blur, maybe I want to adjust it a little bit. So now what I can do is, not only can I turn it off, let me show you how that works. So I just click on the eyeball, it's off, that filter is done. I haven't destroyed my original image. If I want to re-edit that, all I need to do is double click on the filter, and then that filter goes ahead and opens back up, and you'll notice right here in the middle that it's still got the same settings that I had when I went in there and created that filter initially. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust that by maybe I'm going to go this direction, make it white. Okay, so I made my adjustments on my project, I hit OK, and then there's my change. Non-destructive. I can change my mind constantly, do whatever I want, and I haven't destroyed my original image. Okay, so that's your smart object. And then those of you who have used adjustment layers, the best place to do your adjustment layers, I feel, is to come down here to your layers panel. And for those of you who watched Seinfeld, that TV show, there was a show where he was in a bakery and he was looking at a cookie. Remember the cookie? He says, if we could only look to the cookie. The cookie was black and white. It was a cookie right in the middle. So one thing you could do is remember that if you look to the cookie at the bottom, that's how you're going to do your adjustment layer. So I'm going to come down here, click on that, and what I like to use is levels. I have problems with curves. I still haven't figured out how curves work yet. So I'm going to go to levels, and in CS4 you get an adjustment layer up here, your dialog box up here, as opposed to in the other programs you'll get, the other versions you'll get a big dialog box here. So it's pretty much the same though. So I'm going to go ahead and make my adjustments. It looks pretty dark up there. But this is adjustment layer. I haven't destroyed my original image. If I change my mind, I could always turn it off right here on my layers panel. And there's my original. Or I can turn it back on. There's my adjusted layer. Okay. In CS4, all you would need to do is click on it and come back up here to readjust it. In older versions, what you're going to do is you're going to click on this icon right here, and that will go ahead and open up your dialog box, and you can readjust your levels. Okay. So both of these are non-destructive edits. Okay. And these are good ways to adjust your projects so you're not destroying your original image. Okay. So you got your adjustment layers and you got your smart objects. Are there any questions with the smart objects or adjustment layers?
Did you duplicate your image to begin with?
I did not. Did not. And that would normally be another way of working. You could, instead of duplicating your image, your layer and working on that, this is a different way of working instead of doing that.
And my rule is you never work with an original.
I'm sorry?
I said my rule is just never work with an original.
Yeah, and that's a good way. Don't work with your original, but this is one way that you know if you made it a smart object, you're not actually destroying your original.
But you're working in RAW, you always have your original.
Yes.
So it kind of does it for you.
Exactly. So you do all you can and the thought here is that you do all you can in Camera Raw, for those of you who shoot in Camera Raw, and then at some point there's something you can't do in Camera Raw, like run a filter, well then that's when you open it up in Photoshop and do this. So
That's what I was going to ask. This could be a JPEG image too.
this could be an original. Yeah, what I like to do, open up my JPEG inside Photoshop and do a save as, file, save as, and I save it as the native Photoshop file, the PSD. That way your layers will stay in there and you can go back to them and re-edit them. Okay.